Good afternoon to our friends on the East Coast, and good morning to those of you calling in from the West Coast. My name is Becky Robinson, and I'm so pleased to welcome you to today's stewardship conversation with Peter Block, Meg Wheatley, and Steve Piersanti. I'd like to introduce Steve. He's the president of Barrett Kohler Publishers, and he's going to introduce our other guests today as we get started.
Okay, thanks so much for joining us for this webinar. It is an absolute delight, a privilege to have Peter Block and Meg Wheatley joining us at this time, and that is, for me in particular, that is because they have played such a central role in the whole history of Barrett Kohler Publishers from the very beginning. Many of the concepts of Barrett Kohler have come out of Peter's work, particularly in stewardship. Many other concepts have come out of Meg's work in leadership in the new science. I think some of that will come out particularly around stewardship during the course of our webinar today. Of course, both of those books were big bestsellers that helped launch our company, that became much of what got us off the ground. In addition, Peter and Meg have helped create the Barrett Kohler community. Many of the people who are part of our readership, are part of our being manuscript reviewers, or all areas of our community came from people that they brought into the company. They have also brought many other authors to Barrett Kohler, both directly by connecting us with them, recommending them, and because the power of their ideas have attracted so many other authors. So a large part of what Barrett Kohler is today can be traced to their work, so it is such a great privilege to have them with us today. I will say that almost every Barrett Kohler employee has received a copy of Stewardship from me since the company was founded 21 years ago, and many of the employees have also received a copy of Leadership in the New Science since that time, because these ideas have been so central. So I'm very excited to be able to talk more about stewardship. So I'll turn now to Peter and Meg.
Well, I have the great possibility of interviewing my beloved colleague Peter about this extraordinary concept of stewardship that has now been re-expressed in the just released second edition. Peter, I'd like to start by asking you about stewardship then and now, 20 years ago and now.
Well, thank you, Steve, for the kind comments, and Meg, it's a joy always. So 20 years ago, stewardship was a radical idea. It said that the task of leadership, the task of management, is to distribute power, decentralize power, give choice close to a customer, choice close to a supplier, close to where the work is done. And here we are 20 years later in a culture that loves progress, wants to know things are better. It's just as radical idea today as it was 20 years ago. And in fact, the culture has changed, but it's changed in the direction of an automated life. Most companies now, we have this kind of strange economy nobody knows how to talk about, where it's highly profitable and underemployed, high unemployment. Which all that means is that we've outsourced or automated as many jobs as possible. And the same with the customer. Now as a customer, I'm doing the work that customer service people used to do, so it takes me 10 minutes to get what I want from a phone call. So the culture, people are still afraid of their bosses, which is just disappointing to me. And so I think the need for stewardship, which I can explain in a minute, is as great as ever. There's still a need to look to the next generation. There's still a need to hold a place for the unborn king, the unborn child, which was what stewardship originally meant. And the stewardship ideas are still based on principles that we know are successful and useful for any kind of organizational life. So it's a kind of an interesting point. Meg says the tide has turned. There are things happening. The stewardship ideas are in play. Steve is a good example of why it's such a joy to have Steve on the call. is that Steve has taken these ideas and brought them into being. And so Barrett Kohler stands as an example of the ideas about redistributing power and class distinctions. Transparency, giving people choice, works in a marketplace, because Steve's running a tough business. In the independent publishing business now, it's as tough as it's ever been to make a living, and Steve is thriving. So for him, as an example, Steve is awesome. So that's kind of the overview. I think our job in this call isn't just to critique the world, but is to give voice to the counter story. And that's kind of how I see, spending this time together with the people. Thank you for showing up. But that's my overall statement. The stewardship is the redistribution of wealth and resources close to the bottom, close to the edge, close to the margin, and it's done for the long run. And that sits in a world that now acts in the short run and wants everything as centralized as humanly possible. So if you accuse this idea of slight idealism, you won't be far wrong. But I also think there's evidence that these ideas are useful and even happening now. We can talk about that.
Could you advance to the next slide, please, where the definition of stewardship is? Thank you. So, Peter, I'd like to talk some more, and we will have time to hear about Steve's direct experience with stewardship within Barrett Kohler in a little while. But first, I'd like to push back on the concept that this is an ideal. And I see stewardship and this commitment to a different kind of leadership as absolutely essential if we're going to get through this time. And so I would just like to hear your thoughts on that. It's not idealistic to me right now. It's a necessity.
See, I take when people accuse me of being idealistic, I take it as a compliment. Because part of the dominant narrative is if it's not practical, nothing can happen. And so people want to go right to the bottom line. They think and so this is needed now. It is practical now. I think younger people are looking for some purpose larger than to make money. And so I hold both as very essential, practicality and faith and idealism. And so that's just a thought about that, and I can get specific about the practical. It also takes back some language. Stewardship originally was fundraising in the church, and it says, no, caring for the future is all of our business. It's not a spiritual or a Sunday activity. It also says that service means something and dominate, and maybe more than self-interest. So it reconstructs economics. Economics is the exchange, the study of self-interest. This is a part of the new economics that this supports, is to say there's such a thing as generosity, there's such a thing as altruism, and we need an economy of altruism, an economy of generosity. So the service word means something. It also uses the word control, which is the illusion that has sustained us for a long time. And so we wish to have control and see little evidence that we do. So it kind of reclaims that and puts a question mark around this longing for control and predictability. And finally, it reclaims the word accountability. To be accountable is to stand up for something. It's not to be held by someone else. And so most of our system world thinks you have to hold people accountable. You need performance management systems. You need performance appraisal systems. And those all produce compliance, which is weak on performance. And so this kind of relanguaging or reclaiming under the banner of stewardship, leadership under stewardship, is to say accountability can be chosen. People have a wish to be accountable, and accountability grows more out of relatedness and people being authentic with each other than a lot of watching and oversight. And so it's a new narrative is part of what the book represents.
And Meg, if I can just chime in about that point, I think that what Peter just said, I think, is central, that the idea of stewardship is that you have accountability, you act in the interests of, you try and further the interests of the whole organization, of others, the people to whom you have stewardship, without having control. And this is one of the most difficult concepts of stewardship, because we are so encultured that in order to be accountable for something, you have to be in control of it. And the idea that you should be responsible for making good things happen, even though you may not be the one that is the boss or in control, or is just hard for people to grasp. They keep wanting to go back. I can't be accountable if I'm not in control, and that's something that I think is one of the core concepts of stewardship. Give up control. Give up the idea that you have to be in control of others, but yet you can still take responsibility for making things better, for serving the common good, for serving the whole.
So, Steve, I'd like to invite you to say some more about your direct experience of leading Barrett-Kohler so consciously and beautifully using the concept of stewardship. So you just named one thing that's quite difficult and challenging. What are some of your other learnings about implementing stewardship as you have done over 21 years now?
Well, the first thing is simply that stewardship is a very powerful concept. It's a big idea. Once you kind of wrap your mind around it, it can influence everything that you do. It can help you walk a different path. In the very first catalog that we published of our books in 1992 was actually the catalog that announced your book, Leadership in Your Science, Meg. In that, and I was at that point, we hadn't published stewardship, but we were. I had been working on stewardship for a number of months. I was deeply immersed in the concepts in stewardship. It came out the next year. But in that catalog, I wrote, if I were to choose one word to describe our vision, it would be stewardship. By this, I mean a deep sense of responsibility to administer the publishing company for the benefit of all of our stakeholder groups: authors, customers, employees, suppliers and subcontractors, owners, and the societal and environmental communities in which we live and work. Each of these groups contributes to the success of our publishing venture, and each has a stake or investment in its success, whether that investment is time, talent, money, or other resources. That core concept was so powerful, flowing from stewardship, the idea that we were in service of all of these groups, that our role was not to be in control of them, but to be in service of them, and to be accountable to all of them, that it has influenced everything we've ever done since then. And so partly, it's the power of a big idea to shape everything you do. Then you start going into specific practices around applying stewardship. And so I'll just mention one practice now, and we can come back to some others later. One of the practices is that we've avoided a class system. Most organizations are built upon the idea of a class system, and that the class system is most clearly shown by the compensation system. Most organizations have two compensation systems. One system is designed to pay the executive class as much as possible. The other compensation system is designed to pay everyone else, the employees, as little as possible. Under stewardship, you only have one. You banish the class system. You only have one compensation system, which is for everyone. So everyone is on the same system. It doesn't mean that everyone is paid the same. It means that all of the ways that the compensation is set out, the same system applies to everyone. And so in our case, of Barrett-Kohler, we have one system. We don't have a separate executive bonus or executive incentives or anything like that. All of the incentives within Barrett-Kohler apply to all employees. Within Barrett-Kohler, there's no secrecy around the compensation. Everyone knows everyone else's. So we don't have to have secrecy because it's defensible. The reason you have secrecy in organizations is because it's not really defensible if everyone knew what was really going on. And under stewardship, you're acting in the interests of the whole. In our compensation system, the highest paid person earns only 3.5 times the lowest paid full-time employee in the company. The reason why you get these absurd multiples of executive compensation is because they're on a completely different compensation system. Where you get the CEO being paid 300, 400, 500 times, 1,000 times what lower level people are paid, that would never happen if everyone was on the same compensation system. And so it's just one example of taking the concepts of stewardship and really trying to live by them in an organization. It can be a very powerful way of running an organization or a community.
So what I'd like to underline here and then invite both of you to comment on is that underlying the idea, ideal, and practice of stewardship is a deep respect for other people. And when you don't create a class system, there has had to have been a belief, which I know you hold, Steve, of valuing and treasuring other people's contribution and knowing that you couldn't possibly have created Barrett Kohler by yourself or from your own great vision. And so what I think is a thread running through several of your comments is, first of all, this profound respect for other people and the fact that no leader is successful until they encourage people to step forward with their own talents, and that's reflected in a pay system, but it's also reflected in day-to-day conversations, meetings, etc. But the other thing is why this is so attractive to people as an ideal that sells itself is because it is based on this appreciation and respect for everyone who's part of the organization. And so I think those two things stand in very stark contrast to the kind of beliefs that seem to be motivating leaders today, which I would just quickly describe as feeling that they are superior, believing that most people cannot be trusted. That's why we have this increasing bureaucracy and regulatory environment. We simply don't trust people, and assuming superiority, which makes stewardship with its very contradictory beliefs really stand out as revolutionary to me. So I'd love you both to comment on that.
This is Peter. You know, I would make a distinction here between parenting and partnership, because the parent, in which most organizations are organized around, is great parenting, and this culture is organized around great parenting, would claim respect for others. It would claim love for others. But parenting has the belief that I know what's best for others, and that's the nature of our disrespect. It's not that we don't care about people or that we don't have a deep wish for people's well-being, but we also hold at the same time this notion of I know you don't. I know what's best for you. What you said, Meg, about a kind of leadership that allows other people's talents to show up could be called a not knowing leadership. And that's where I think the rub is. So these ideas of stewardship kind of go with the idea that we're partnership, and partners don't know what's best for each other. They have thoughts, but I don't take you on as property. And as soon as I say, you're my people, I have colonized you. So stewardship could be considered a decolonization form of leadership, a decolonizing form of leadership. The second word I would use is there is a widespread democratization movement going on in this country. Now, it's under the radar. You wouldn't know it. You'd have to read Yes magazine. You'll never see it in the dominant news, Fox, or any other news agencies are not reporting on the widespread democracy that is happening. It's happening in economics. It's happening in the financial world. There's all kinds of conversations going on that align with stewardship, which is to care for the longer run, which is to care for the common good, which is to say if we have a wage discrimination the way we do in this country, we can't survive that. So, all that you're saying, and you, Steve, also, it is happening in a little bit different language, but I do think it is organized around a deep, deep respect for each other and all of each other. It bothers me when we talk about education reform, and people say, oh, my kids are doing well. I know your kids are doing well. It's because you won the lottery. But all of our children have to do well, and that, to me, is underlying the stewardship and the respect you talk about there.
Yeah, so this is Steve, so I would very much agree with Meg and Peter, what you both have said, that underlying all of this is a deep respect for other people. And as Peter said, it's a deep respect built upon partnership instead of on parenting. And so just to give an example of how that plays out at Barrett Kohler, we take a partnering approach in our relationship with our authors, which, amazingly enough, distinguishes us from a lot of other publishers in the sense that many publishers view authors as kind of a necessary nuisance, that the publisher are the experts, and they should be the ones controlling things. So some of the ways that we try and take a more partnering approach with authors is it starts with our publication agreement, which gives authors much more involvement in making the major decisions about a book than is typical in publication agreements. And it's much less burdensome on authors of the authors giving up their rights to the publisher. For example, in our publication agreement, we don't have a clause that the author is obligated to give the publisher the author's next book. Our view is that we should earn that. The author should willingly decide that they want to come back to Barrett Kohler without us having to compel it through the terms of the publication agreement. One of the early observers of our publication agreement, who actually was a colleague of yours, Meg, said the Barrett Kohler publication agreement creates incentives for both parties to contribute and do well, whereas most contracts are contingencies for when things go wrong, legal protection against foul-ups. And then this respect to authors continues beyond our publication agreement with how we work with them on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. For example, much of our many of the decisions, many of the plans about books are made in an author day, where the author comes together with our entire staff and meets with all the key people who they're going to be working with, and they sit down together and plan out how the book is going to look and how the marketing campaigns are going to go and how to coordinate. And so it's more of a partnering, as Peter said, instead of a parenting approach toward publishing books, is one example of that respect in action.
So I would like to point out that in the case of Barrett Kohler, it was a startup led by a leader with enormous integrity and wanting to walk the talk of what you were publishing, Steve. And then, Peter, when you just made reference to the below-the-radar springing up of local control and democracies and people working together at a small scale within their local communities, I'd like to ask the question of, given the direction of increasing command and control, and I would say mean-spiritedness in very large organizations, Is stewardship a possibility there now in this time?
Well, it depends who you want to look at. You know, people ask me, well, how do you convince boards of directors and CEOs and white-collar, top of the, how do you convince them of the stewardship ideas? And my response is, well, if you wanted to bring a new idea into the world, why would you start there? Why go to those places that are, and the people with a lot of power in this culture, I don't have negative things to say about them. I just know how isolated they are and how cut off they are. So I think wherever you are, there is a level and a place and a pocket where you can find, through invitation, people eager to create the kind of world that Steve is describing. And so I would never conclude there are places where this isn't possible. I would just not go to those places that are the most difficult. Because, the people, same with you, Mick, people always say, why don't you come and work with our CEOs? And I always think, why would I do that?
Right.
They're slow learners, disconnected. Now, when they invite us in, it's a miracle. It's breathtaking, So these ideas work everywhere, but the idea that you have to or should start at the top. It should start with government, or should start with the mayor, or should start with the head of agency. I don't think that way anymore. That thinking itself is still valuing parenting in its own way. So if you say, are there places in a mean-spirited world where the public dialogue is unkind, to say the least? Of course there's places. They're everywhere around you. You just won't read about them, and you won't find them by looking at the top. Also, I want to reflect a little bit on reform. So people say, well, what would you go to them with? Well, every institution is calling itself big-time reformers. They're reinventing themselves, but nothing's changing, because most of the reform efforts are to get better management, better control, better order, cleaner, frictionless processes. Frictionless means processes with no people in them. So I have no faith in current reform efforts in healthcare, education, finance, all these areas that are busy reforming, politics. But I do think there's enormous energy and opening. If you say, oh, where are those places that when the invitation occurs, they're open to look at a partnership way of viewing the world. And there's evidence everywhere around us. Every city has pockets of huge democratizing. There are co-op movement is growing like crazy in this country. Food co-ops, commercial co-ops. It's growing like crazy. The finance world, there's huge discussions in every legislature about making banks a public utility again, to work in the common good. So there's a lot going on, but maybe not in the organization we're working in, especially if we look up too high.
So this leads me to what will be my final question to you, Peter, before we open to questions from people listening in. You had one chapter title that I believe was something like "The Journey is in Us," or "The Path is in Us," and I just want to hear you say more about that, because from my own perspective, we're so both mesmerized by changing the whole system, or think it's up to us to change the whole system. And what you're pointing to and what I'm pointing to is the work is whatever we can do where we are. And so look around your local community. Stop worrying about changing the large bureaucracy that you're working within. But I'd like to hear your views on that, not mine.
Well, they're the same. I think part of the within is we all have to do our own work. The most useful question that's helped me make a living for 40 years is after people complain about the world, I say, what's your contribution to the very thing you're complaining about? And it's not a blame question. It's just to say we have to decide that we are agents and we're actors. And if parents don't like what's going on in the school, well, they have to organize parents. They don't have to bang on the teacher's head all the time. And then the other thing you're saying is that local is where the action is. we're so isolated we don't even know it. Teachers, for example, are so isolated. Well, all they need is 2 other teachers in the building. They don't have to get the whole building on board. If individuals can find 2 other people within reach that they can connect with and have conversations about an alternative future, an alternative story, get strength from them, the world changes at that moment. And those 3 people, that small group, then proves experientially that an alternative consciousness is available. And it's not so much, what I said was not so much working on myself, but I need to convince or understand that I am an agent. Steve needed to know that he had it within him to begin a new business when that was not exactly what he had in mind a year before. And he decided he can do it. He has the confidence, the agency. He can create a world. He thought he was working for a world he believed in, and that world disappeared. And so after a while, Steve said, then I guess I'll have to create the world that I want to inhabit. And that's a powerful idea, but it's going to be on a small scale, but scale is overrated. Part of the patriarchy is to say, well, if you can't take it to scale, if you can't do it cheap and do it fast, it's not worth doing. And that's the belief that's killing democracy and killing our spirit.
Steve, do you have anything to comment on this?
Yeah, so thank you. So I'll just say that from the perspective of a organization leader, the perspective of someone who is presumably in a leadership role, how much I feel a need to have support, encouragement,
love.
Yeah, love. I mean, it's probably just a classic thing of it's lonely in leadership roles, but it's more than that. When you're trying to, my point here is that as you find, everyone can find people in their organization, sometimes in leadership roles, who would like to do things in a different way, who would like to do things in a more stewardship way, more partnering way, less of a class system, but they need support. They need people to carry the ball too, and to get behind them and offer verbal support and weigh in discussions about it. The power of any particular leader is way overrated in terms of what that leader can do by herself or himself. And to the degree that Pierre has succeeded, it has been because of our authors like yourselves who have given huge amounts of support and encouragement. It has been because of staff members like 2 of our very first staff members, Pat Anderson and Kristen France, who got this and who tried to live it. And without their support, you just can't do it alone. So everyone has a role, and the degree to which you can help others in the organization who may want to do things a different way is huge. That makes a big difference.
Well, I like ending this section on just reminding everyone that when we do find these leaders who are trying to lead in this new way, that they need our support, because it is very difficult and lonely. I think one of the most awful comments I ever received or I heard about was when a very progressive, highly engagement-oriented vice president was told by his president that your people think too much of themselves. And in this current environment, I would just encourage all of us, when we do find leaders who are willing to partner with us, that we understand we have a significant role to play in supporting them as well as asking them to value us. So let's open for questions now, and my screen has gone blank, Becky, so you're going to have to choose the questions, I think.
Could I suggest something? Becky, let's go to the next slide. The next slide has a list of practical things. and maybe seeing that would help evoke some questions. And then while we're making the switch and opening up the lines for questions, I just have to say that everything we're talking about is very hard to do. That even when you have a leader, when we're committed, even though Steve is 21 years into this successful venture, never underestimate the pull back into patriarchy. Never underestimate people's longing for the safety and the predictability that they thought they had under a more parenting and paternalistic world. And so you just have to go into it knowing that both instincts, both the shadow and the light, are present. Otherwise, you get discouraged, because the pull back to Pharaoh, the pull back to patriarchy, the pull back to boss, love me, all the kind of dependency needs that this culture has encouraged, and the fear that the culture encourages by building a wall against our southern neighbor. So I just want to do that as a transition. Now, if there's questions, I'd love to hear them. Thank you.
Sure. So, Peter, there have been questions pouring in for the entire session, and there's one that's come in twice, so I'm going to start with that one. The question is, what companies have you seen embracing the ideas of stewardship? Who are leading the way? And someone else indicated besides Bear Kohler. So, Peter, if you could maybe share with us some other companies who have embraced these ideas.
Well, there's a company I'm very involved with called LivePerson. This is a .com company. And they're right in the center of the whole internet world, and trying to do data science and figure out how to commercialize our capacity to track people. And their strongest values are ownership and connection and care. So that's a big deal. They say that we're going to build a business by living with each other as every employee as an owner. And they are doing everything they can to give form to that. And they're doing it in an unusual space, which is go, scale, automate. Very, very tense, intense business, but they do everything they can to say we're going to care for the customer and each other. They're working with their customers to help customers get connected within their own customer organization. So they're developing their chat methodology so that it not only is between LivePerson and their customer, it's also within their customer organizations. They're working with 50,000 people on chat rooms every day. They say, how do we get them connected? So that to me is quite amazing to say a kind of automation, technology-based business would see care, ownership, and connection as the key, and culture the key to their future. One other I'll tell you is Mars. This is a privately held company. The company that brings you Wrigley chewing gum and M&Ms. Two of their values, which they take very seriously, one is mutuality. So they think that every transaction they have with a customer or with the world should be in the interest of both parties, which is partnership. And they believe in freedom. Most companies are cascading change or rolling it down. And Mars, for whatever the reason, believes in high engagement. And so LivePerson is a small company, but in a surprising industry. Mars is very traditional, making candy, food. 75,000 employees, been around for a long time. And they're just as committed to the idea of engagement and partnership and mutuality as anybody I know. So now, having said that, it doesn't help anybody very much unless you're working for LivePerson at Mars. But there are examples, even now, like that. And these are today examples. There's lots of examples going back 10, 15 years.
So I'd like to just point out this is always a question that any of us get if we're presenting a bold new idea, right? And
right.
You answered that in another book, that the answer to how is yes. We have to develop our own belief and our own commitment. And as Steve said, this is, for me, a lifelong process that we're engaging in, that we want to be the ones who practice a stewardship approach. We want to be the ones who help not who facilitate it, making it available to many more people. But if we think we're just going to adopt this if we see it working elsewhere, then that's a very shallow motivation, and it won't last for very long. So I would just encourage everyone, as you read the book, which you have to read the book, as you read the book, to just see if you identify with the concepts in your own experience. Where have you experienced being held in true regard? Where have you been invited to participate as an equal and as an essential partner in any project? And in that way, you will notice that stewardship is just describing what I find is the only form of leadership that human beings around the world really respond well to. And it doesn't matter our age, our class, or our culture, ethnicity. There is only this form of leadership that human beings really respond well to and blossom within.
Thanks so much, Meg. I have two similar questions that I want to pull together. One person is asking, how do you integrate a new employee into the philosophy of stewardship? And a complementary question is, can stewardship be brought to existing businesses, so ones that are already established? So I thought those two questions kind of work well together, so I invite you to address those, please.
Steve, how do you bring people on board?
Well, as I mentioned, I have an interview with each new employee at Barrett-Kohler before they are offered the position. What they don't know is that the decision's already been made to offer them, because I'm not the one. They think that I'm the one making the decision because I'm the president, but in fact, someone else is actually making the hiring decision. And I'm having an interview with them, though, before they know that I'm not the decision maker. They kind of assume I am. But in that interview, I'm talking about a bunch of concepts about stewardship. And I'm asking them, I'm starting out by asking them during the interview, what have they observed around Barrett-Kohler? What have they picked up on how things work at Barrett-Kohler? And so I just did this a couple of days ago with a new editorial assistant that we're hiring. And I'm wanting them to kind of observe from their interviews, from their interactions. They may have only had 3 or 4 or 5 different interactions with their company, but I'm wanting them to notice things, and we're talking about what they've noticed about how things work or what other employees have told them. And then I'm giving them a copy of Stewardship and asking them to read the book. So that's kind of the starting point. Then the way Barrett-Kohler works is we have a monthly staff meeting. It's a half-day meeting, and all of our staff are together talking about the core things about the company. A lot of things that are decided just by an executive in another company get decided together within Barrett-Kohler, such as changes in our compensation system or how much we're going to raise our compensation scale each year. We decide as a company. We actually take a vote on it. I very frequently get outvoted in that vote, but that's okay. I get outvoted both ways, both up and down. Sometimes the staff is wanting to increase our salaries more than I had proposed. Other times the staff is more cautious than what I'm suggesting. But what the point is that the whole staff is, and new employees are seeing the process in action. When they see a staff meeting being run with everyone having a voice and everyone having the opportunity to put items on the agenda, and many different staff members having items on the agenda, and seeing how one area in which the process plays out, often they're quite surprised. So it's kind of just seeing it in action is another way. But I still want to reinforce the point that was made. This is tough. This is difficult. As Peter said, we are so drawn back to the traditional way of doing things that it's just like it's the water all around us is doing things in a more patriarchal, a more parental way or a more hierarchical way, and so it's not easy. So you never, it's not a battle that's ever won. I mean, you're always having to continue trying to reinforce it, think through it, think how it would apply in your organization in different ways.
So let me just add, maybe do you want, I'm just going to give a specific about bringing people in. It's the mindset. First of all, you get people on board, you welcome them. So you say, how do we welcome new people? Second is you don't just tell them, here's who we are, but you ask them, who are you? What gifts did you come here to bring? And then the third is that their isolation is the killer. That interns and people joining organizations stay isolated too long. And so you need some kind of buddy system, some kind of small group. You need to say who in the existing organization is good at welcoming, is good at helping people get through the first 3 months and find a sense of purpose. So you can lay out some principles like that, and then you just get form to them. And but the idea of welcome, that new people are here because strangers, and we need their gifts. We don't just need to get them on board, so to speak. And the fact that because they're here, they need support more than ever, so you need some kind of support system around them with welcoming kind of people. And the people that welcome them should be from every level. All these things we say, how do we do this? Well, everybody there has the capacity to participate. So when Steve says we're all together once a month, he means everybody. He doesn't mean management or the salary. That's everybody. So let me stop there. So the other question was, can you bring this into an existing organization? Absolutely. Because once you get beneath the PR and the surface thing, most of them are not doing well. People are not happy. They're afraid. They're uneasy. They're nervous. Why would they work so many hours? Why do we give up? So there's a great deal of nervousness and anxiety in these systems. And so you become an inviting, organizing agent to turn some of that complaining anxiety into an alternative future for those people.
Great. Thanks so much. So I have another question, and I want to apologize because the questions are just flooding in, and it's clear to me that within the time that we have allotted, we will not get to all of them. So I'm trying to pick and choose from the ones that have come in and pick the ones that have a common theme. So this question says, if change towards stewardship is best begun below the top level, how can those wanting that change initiate and facilitate it, particularly in businesses?
Meg, you have a thought?
The answer to how is yes. And I really mean that sincerely. You have to believe that this is the only sane way to structure work. And you create the change where you are. You don't you don't waste energy and time on trying to get the approval, the blessing, the interest of the top. Peter already covered that beautifully. You just start with your team or start with your functional area, or even if that's not possible, as Peter said, find 2 other people and just start the conversation about how could we be together differently? How could we be together in an air of mutual respect? How could we, in our next project, engage with each other differently? I think we waste so much time and energy in thinking that, one, we need the support of the top, but second, we also spend a lot of energy that leads to heartbreak in believing that if we do it well, others will want to learn from us. I don't see that happening. I haven't seen it happening forever, that you do something extraordinarily well, you get better results, you meet plan, your team is happy, and nobody else cares because they're all so busy, and it would require some attention, and it would require a change in a willingness to change if they were truly to ask you, how did you achieve such good success, such contented, productive, creative staff? How did you achieve that? I think we just do the work for its own satisfaction, and if others learn from us, that's a miracle. If they don't learn from us, we have still created something where we are that is of value and meaning to us and to those colleagues that we have partnered with. So I just want us to shift our focus now to ourselves and what's possible if I act with true partnership and true commitment to this set of values and practices. And then we see what we can accomplish in the long run.
Yeah, this is Steve. I want to just endorse what Meg just said, every single point that she made. And I will point out that the answer to how is one of the chapters in Stewardship, which Peter then expanded into a whole book. The answer to how is yes. But the underlying idea of that is that the question itself reveals that when people say how, I don't know how to do this, or how can we do this, it really is a statement of their ambivalence. The real issue is that they are not yet clear on what they really want. Because if they get clear on what they really want, they can find ways to do things. There are plenty of other resources, this book and many other books, that can help them to do just about anything that they want to do, or just asking other people. There are ways to find how to do things. The real holdup is us not being clear on what it is we really want. Once we get clear on that, we find out how.
Or what we're willing to risk and where
Right.
our courage really lies. Yeah.
Right.
Peter, I'm also glancing some of the questions. And I also want to be a voice for very practical aspects. You know, there's some very practical things anybody can do today. One is change the way that you meet. Every time everybody goes to meetings, call them gatherings. Meetings are where people decide what kind of place is this, what kind of culture do we have here. That's where they draw conclusions from. And most meetings are not designed in a partnership way. They're designed in a let's get something done, let's go as fast as we can, let's leave with a list. Suppose you started every meeting by having a check-in and people say, why was it important for me to show up today? Suppose you went around the room and if there's a lot of people, break them into groups of 3 and say, what do you want to leave here with? Which is different than looking to you, the convener, and saying, what do you have in mind for us? Suppose 50% through every meeting you stop and said, are we getting what we came for? See, these questions, are we getting what we came for? Why did you decide to show up today? What do you want to leave with? At the end, you ask people, what's the promise we're willing to make to each other, rather than having a list and a questionable commitment. These are very concrete social inventions that you can bring into every place you're going this afternoon, today. Now, it doesn't mean they all work. It does mean if you're in charge, it's a little easier. But the meetings, how you measure things, you say, let us decide on some measures that have meaning to us, so you initiate the measurement discussion instead of complaining about what kind of controls exist in the world. You say, what? So let's us take the first step on saying, how do we know that what we're doing is useful in the world? Third thing is you can say, we need time to be together. Stewardship cannot be implemented electronically in any way or form. And what we do is we kind of surrender to the electronic solution world. It's faster, let's connect, let's start a website. All of those are wonderful reminders, and they're wonderful sources of information, and they're great time savers, but they don't build relationships. And so you say, well, why don't I spend the next month deciding on a group of people I'm engaged with? Could be clients, could be other people work here. And let's just spend some time together talking about what are we doing here. A great question to ask inside any system is, of all the things you're doing, what really matters to you? Could we just talk like a book club? Instead of having a book club, just sit down once in a while and spend an hour saying, what are we doing that means something? So all of these are implementable instantly. They don't need a large-scale agreement on pay systems. They don't need to make all the offices the same site or get rid of assigned parking places. And so the task is to say, as an agent, as a commitment to the future, I'm going to find those things I can do around me. Now, if they don't have a big enough impact, then that's a conversation with God.
Thanks, Peter. I saw a question come in just a moment ago about change happening in communities. And I think that the comments you were making really speak to that idea of community. So I'm wondering, how do we help people understand this concept in a community?
Meg, all my ideas came from you. Why don't you comment on this?
Well, that's probably not true, but thank you. I think I just want to go back to what I said. I slipped it in a moment ago. In my experience, I have now tested this out with thousands and thousands of people around the world. They all, when I asked them to describe a leader they were happy to follow, they always describe the same things, and that is what's represented in this concept of stewardship, also in servant leadership. So when we're working in community, it can be a little trickier because people can come from many different traditions and have different views of authority in their own class. If they come from a class society, they may not step forward as easily, or if they've been oppressed, they won't step forward. But underneath all that superficial experience, there is always a human being who will respond when this is evoked or provoked to stepping forward, because the leader is consistent with the invitation that I need you. You have to be partners with me in this work. So again, it takes perseverance. All of this takes a steadfast commitment that this is the only way I want to lead, or I want to be in partnership with others. And then you just, you go through the snapbacks, you go through the return to safety and dependency. You expect those, but you don't let them sway you from moving forward on this path.
See, the sentence I got from you was that no matter what the problem is, community is the answer.
Yes,
and,
that's true.
In this individualistic culture, that's a big idea. In this culture based on achievement, where we take our children from day one and start measuring them on a normal curve, that's a big idea. So the idea is to hold in your mind that we're here to build community. And whether that's in a neighborhood, whether that's in a school building, whether that's, it doesn't matter the venue. You have to hold in your mind that the number one task of leadership is not to be a role model, not to articulate the vision, not to be stylistically superior or even smarter. The number one task of leadership is community building. How do we get peers connected to each other? Now it's very hard. Inside systems it's easier because when you call a meeting, people have to show up. When Steve calls his meeting once a month, they show up because they work there. So if you're working in neighborhoods, in volunteer settings, then it's much more complicated and it's much more relational, but you still keep in your mind that the first task of leadership is building community.
So
how are we doing with it?
Yeah, we need to wrap up the hour. So I'm wondering perhaps if each of you can share some closing thoughts. And I have some ideas. There have been a few questions that have come in about, can we see the questions? There's obviously many questions that we didn't get to. So I'll work with Meg and with Peter and with Steve to try to get some answers to these questions and get them out, because we have the distribution list of the people on the call. We'll also send out a link to the recording so that people can listen later. And so maybe each of you want to just share one parting thought, and then we'll put up some information on the slides about how people can contact you outside of this forum.
Well, this is Steve. I will just say that, again, kind of an indication of what I view of the importance of this topic. I've written the foreword for the second edition of Stewardship, the new edition that just came out this month. of stewardship, and it's the first time I've ever written a foreword for a book. It may well be the only time I ever write a foreword for a book, but it's an indication of the importance. First time I've participated in a webinar like this, and so and the reason I've done that is because this concept has been so central to our company, and it has proven so valuable, so powerful in guiding our business. And as it's not easy to try and live by the principle of stewardship, but I believe that it's worth it, and it's powerful in running an organization.
So I have very much enjoyed talking with you, Peter, and Steve. As always, I want to make my final comment be on the questions. The questions that appeared were in the context of this webinar. I think I have no interest in answering them because I'm going to suggest a different process, which is that you read the book and then you develop your questions, and then you take those questions to a few colleagues within your organization or team or life that you think are also interested, and you do have a little book club around this. I mean, what better way to make this come alive for you in your work than to start to really discuss the questions and the sensibilities that Peter raises so beautifully in this book. So I would just say the questions that have been submitted were for now, but there's a much deeper inquiry that needs to happen as a follow-on among those of you who have been intrigued by these ideas.
Beautiful. So two thoughts. One is on the screen now is designlearning.com. There's a bunch of us committed to these ideas, and if you have questions, if you'll send them to us at designlearning.com, we will answer every one, and we'd love to just have a connection with you. We're trying to learn what these ideas mean now, 20 years later, and we're thinking of designing a workshop around the stewardship ideas. So if you are interested in that, or even would like to help us with that, that would be an amazing offer, and we will get back to you. The second is that Steve, in the first couple of comments, said he knows that a big idea, when you find it, influences everything you do. And I love this conversation because it supports the notion of big ideas that matter. That we live in such a transactional world, our attention span is disappearing. Our time scale is so short. There's studies now that deep thinking and deep reading are disappearing in the internet age. And I fear that with them will go the valuing of thought. With them, we're in such a hurry. It's like we don't have time for thought. When Meg and I run workshops, at the end, when you say, how was it? People say it was nice to have time to think, which means that maybe they don't have time. So I just think to thank people for showing up. Meg and Steve, your support is life-changing for me and always has been. And the fact that we still care about ideas gives me an enormous amount of faith. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.